Well, hey everyone, I'm so excited to introduce you to my good friend Jason Ramano. Jason just is, in my opinion, I like to refer to him as the sports podfather. He leads one of the greatest sports podcasts. He actually even produces the Home Team podcast that Sam Acho, Trey Burton, myself do. And what I love about Jason is his character. What I love about Jason is the leader, the thoughtfulness that he has, and just the friend that he's become. And he wrote a book, and Jason, welcome to Mission Community Church. I'm so grateful that you're here, but you wrote a book that came out that I feel like I've handed off to many different coaches, many different FCA athletes, and people who are leading ministries, but also people who are in the marketplace. And there's this book called The Uniform of Leadership. And I'd love for you to kind of give the little setup of like, this is your second book that you've written. Why this book? Tell us a little bit of like the origin story of it.
Yeah, Steve, first of all, great to see you. Thanks
Good to see
for
you.
having me here. This is interesting because, first of all, I never pictured being an author. My background is in broadcasting, working at ESPN and producing content, radio, television, social, digital media. So the last thing I ever thought of was me someday being an author. Certainly never desired to write a book. I didn't really enjoy the process. You know this, writing books are very, very hard. But I think after writing the first book, which is more of a, I guess it's more of a autobiographical type book on forgiveness, everybody asks, do you want to write a second book? And what would that be on? And I said, well, the most common question I get is, what was it like to work at ESPN? And, tell me some of the stories, tell me some of the people that you've met. And I thought, okay, that's easy to put in a book, but that's not interesting enough. And for me, it's just bragging about like the opportunities that I got to have. And I really didn't want a book that was just that. If I was going to write a book, I thought, okay, maybe something that can be applicable in people's lives, right? And I've been really devouring leadership books and learning a lot about leadership, servant leadership. I would say over the past maybe 5-6 years before we decided to write The Uniform of Leadership. And, people like Simon Sinek and John Gordon, and obviously the guru, John Maxwell, people like that are just amazing at what they do. And really, I thought, okay, if I'm going to write a book, maybe we write it on leadership. Maybe we write it on the lessons that I learned from spending time with some of the most famous people in sports at ESPN, and then write it in a way where people could go through it together as a team, in a small group, maybe a coach, maybe you're a president or a CEO and you have a bunch of people underneath you that you're trying to help with their leadership. So I wrote this book, and the idea of it was to tell the ESPN stories, but really to look at the lessons, the biblical lessons that come from my experiences that you can take and go through with a team.
It's so good, and it really, really is so applicable. I love even the concept of the uniform of leadership, because it's like something that we're putting on. And for many of us here at Mission, they're walking into whether a small business that they lead, some team that they're managing, some kind of startup that they're building. But you really talk about the emphasis of this uniform and what's the real purpose behind it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the uniform, obviously, I'm a sports guy. So we wanted to connect sports in some way with the title. And the actual concept of the uniform of leadership stemmed from a title change when we were putting together the book. And then I started thinking about the concept of the uniform, right? And my co-author, Steve Copeland, and I are thinking through, okay, what's so unique about the uniform? Well, the uniform has usually two sides to it. The front has the team name, or the place that you're playing for, the team that you're playing for or representing. And then the back usually has a number and the name of the person who's wearing that jersey or wearing that uniform. So I thought, man, I think there's something there, because I think a lot of us get so caught up in playing for the name on the back of the jersey, or even in life, living for the name on the back of the jersey first. We're selfish by nature, Steve. And so the concept of the uniform for me was, the real secret, in my opinion, to being a great leader is to take yourself a little bit out of the equation and to play for others. Or in this case, to live for God first, others second, and then ourselves third. So wearing the uniform of leadership properly is turning it around and making sure that you're playing for the team on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. And the team on the front, in this case, is playing for others first. Jesus is the great model that I look at, maybe the greatest leader ever. He is the greatest leader ever. And in the Bible, when you look in Matthew, he says, listen, I came to this earth not to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. So when you think about the words of Jesus, and listen, this guy could have came down and said, listen, you all are serving me. I'm Jesus. But that's not what he did. He said, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to give my life as a ransom for you. So that's kind of the mindset for the uniform, Steve, is every single day we need to wake up. We put this metaphorical uniform on and we have to make a decision on who we're playing for. Is it going to be us first, or is it going to be others? And in essence, God first.
I love that. I love that because, in so many ways we learn about different mentalities. Kobe had the Mamba mentality. But as I was reading through the uniform of leadership, I just kept thinking like, man, am I in this leadership setting centering myself, positioning myself first, my desires? And I had heard of, I am second ministries. But then I was like, Jason then starts talking. He's like, no, I'm going third. And I was like, man, it's like the how low can you go? And I'm just thinking about this, like you're at ESPN and you're there 17 years and you're doing, Sports Center, producing Monday Night Football, Sunday NFL Countdown, Mike and Mike, you were doing that in the mornings. I mean, how did you take this philosophy and actually put that into practice of I am third? I'm gonna live for Christ. I'm going to put others ahead of myself, my dreams, my wants, my own desires. How did you do that for better and maybe ways you wish you could go back and do it differently?
Yeah, well, that's the great sort of intersection that we all have to come to in our leadership journey and just in our journey in general is playing for others, playing for God, or playing for ourselves. And, I failed miserably at that for many years. My faith journey, Steve, goes back 20 years ago in 2001 when I began a relationship with Christ, when I really started what I like to say is saying yes and taking that first step towards Christ. I didn't know what I was really taking a first step towards, but I just knew in my heart that day it was open, so let's go. But what I didn't understand was that saying yes to Christ does not necessarily mean that you are putting Christ first in all that you're doing. And so for me, I said yes, and I began this journey, and I'm so thankful that I did. But if I'm being honest with you, my desires was always to appease Jason and to, make sure that I was the priority, and thus ESPN the priority. I mean, I hate to say this, but I was married and we had our daughter Sarah in 2004, and I wish I could tell you that they were the priority or even that God was the priority. And I think if you and I had met many years ago, I would have told you that. But deep down, if I was being honest and if you were seeing how my life was being lived, ESPN was clearly at the top. Not just as far as what I cared about, but as far as where my identity lied, who I was trying to please, my bosses, trying to climb the corporate ladder. That was the struggle for many years. Now, I still went to church and I was getting involved in Bible studies and small groups and growing in my faith and trying to become a better husband and a better dad. So I would say that I was growing during those years, but I still had my priorities mixed. My identity was kind of mixed up a little bit. And then came this day in 2010. And for those watching that may not know football, there's a guy named Coach Tony Dungey, who, even if you're not a football fan, you probably know who Tony Dungey is. He's written amazing books on leadership. He's also a Pro Football Hall of Fame coach, won a Super Bowl with the Colts and was with Tampa for many years. And he's now a broadcaster at NBC. 2010 comes, and the job I was doing at the time, I was a talent producer, a booker at ESPN. And I secured Coach Dungey to come to our ESPN offices that day in Bristol, Connecticut. And I was going to take him around and show him and make sure he got from show to show all the different shows at ESPN to help promote his new book, The Mentor Leadership, ironically, which is a great book to pick up as well. And Coach Dungey comes and he brings his assistant, Jessica, with him and a couple of other people. And he's just such a nice guy. And I'm genuinely interested in talking to him about matters of faith. And he asked me a question that day that changes my life forever, really. And it changed my focus on how to live my life, I believe, in the right way as a follower of Christ. So this question stems from us finding a moment in the ESPN green room where we had just finished an interview on Mike and Mike in the morning, and we're getting ready to go on Sports Center, and we have about 20 minutes. So I take him to the green room and get him a drink or whatever, and we sit down. And first of all, Coach Dungey doesn't need to take any interest in me. I'm just a producer dude, just sitting there, kind of guiding him from show to show. Usually the guests are the ones that get all the attention, but Coach Dungey turned that around and he said, "Hey, Jason, these guys all know you from previous bookings and say that you're a man of faith. That's tremendous. You've been here at ESPN a long time. Tell me how you live your faith out here in the workplace at ESPN." My eyes got big, and and I'm not one who's afraid to have a conversation, Steve, or talk, but I was kind of dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say to him. And I just kind of looked and put my head down and shook my head for a minute. And I, looked back up at him and I go, "Coach, I don't know if I can even do that here at ESPN." I said, working for, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes or Athletes in Action or Sports Spectrum, that's easy because you're a Christian and you're sharing stories about Jesus in the sports space. I said, but at ESPN, I can't really do that. I said, I'm a producer. I'm not a Christian. How am I supposed to do that? And I could see Coach Dungey just, kind of disappointed, and he kind of looks down. He just kind of shakes his head very subtly. And right as he's about to answer, his assistant, Jessica, who's there helping promote, his book, who I had known previously, so she felt comfortable doing this, steps in front of Coach Dungey, puts her hands on her hips, kind of looks at me with a very stern look, kind of like a disappointed mom looking at their kids when they bring home a bad report card, right? And she just shakes her head and looks at me and says, "Jason, you don't get what Coach Dungey was trying to ask there, do you?" And I'm like, "Jessica, I don't. Well, help me out here." And she goes, "You just don't get it." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble here." And she goes, "Look at where you work. Look at this place. There's 3,000, 4,000 people at ESPN. The campus is huge. We had just taken them around campus a little bit." She's like, "Look at this place, this ministry field that you work in. Look at how you can be a light to all of these people every single day by how you carry yourself, by how you walk, by how you do your job. Look at this as a mission field." She goes, "Someday God might call you away from ESPN." Spoiler alert, he did. "But until that happens," she says, "you are to bloom where you're planted, right here. Don't get so focused on going somewhere else. Don't think that you can't be a believer in Christ right here. You are to bloom where you're planted, be a light for Christ right here in the workplace. And until he calls you away, this is where God has you." And it was like this light bulb, Steve, went on over my head. And I just started getting it at that moment and realizing, oh yeah, wait a minute here. I can be a Christian at ESPN and be a light for people. And you know what changed? I talked about that identity issue earlier. We all struggle with identity, being known for what we do or what we've done or accomplished versus who God says we are, right? And I had that identity crisis just like everybody. But that day, I think I started to realize that I wasn't just an ESPN producer who happened to be a Christian, which if you had met me, that's probably how I would have identified myself. In fact, people who I was going to church with at that time, a lot of them didn't know my name, but they knew I worked at ESPN. So they would call me Mr. ESPN. They had no idea who I was other than that or what my name was. But I went from being a ESPN producer who happened to be a Christian to working towards this the next few years, understanding that I was a follower of Christ first, who happened to work at ESPN, a follower of Christ who happened to be a dad, who happened to be a husband, who happened to be the son of Joe and Linda, who happened to be the older brother of Chris and Damian. Like once I got that changed everything because now I could go be a light for Christ everywhere I was, including ESPN.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the identity thing, man, that was a big one for me. And I think that just, Bob Goff likes to talk about that quarter turn.
Yep.
That quarter turn for me going from That's really a uniform of leadership shift, right? You go from being identified as an ESPN producer who happens to be a Christian to being a Christian who is an ESPN producer and many other things. Now your priorities are in straight. Now your purpose is truly to live for Christ first.
Yeah.
And that was what it did for me, man. It changed my life.
That's so good. And this is the crazy thing about Tony Dungey. I've had the privilege to interact with him a few times, and he has that soft demeanor, and somehow just looks inside your heart, pulls it out, shows it to you, and then puts it right back. I mean, the guy is unbelievable. What's amazing, Jason, for me is, I think for many of my friends here listening who have experienced, working at Intel, working at Arizona State University, a small business owner, startup, in many ways, we will live with integrity to where we find our identity. So if our identity is, I work for Intel, we're going to live with integrity because we got to keep performing, keep producing. What I love about this story is it's like you started, 04, 02. When did you start?
2000.
2000.
21 years ago.
So 10 years that you were just cranking, working and building and achieving. And ESPN was so important to you. And what's amazing to me though is from that moment, that conversation, that subtle shift of, it was like God saying, I put you here. This is your assignment. What would you say to, those that are, in the marketplace, in the school system, and they can look at it and go, the church is, on Sunday, but I go to church. I'm a part of a small group, but it seemed like Tony and Jessica were saying, no, the mission field is ESPN. What would you say specifically to them? Because I just want them to understand what you're getting at, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, I would say the mission field is wherever you are, right? And that if you're at work for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, that's your mission field that day. Now, I remember telling a couple people this after I shared the Coach Dungey story, and I said, listen, it did not mean that the next day at ESPN, I threw on a shirt with a Bible message on it, brought my Bible in with me, and just started preaching the gospel. That didn't happen. Okay, Steve. In fact, it didn't happen for the next 7 years until I left. It just wasn't going to happen because that's not why I was hired. I was hired to be a producer. Now, that didn't mean that every single moment, at least on the surface, I screwed that up too, but every single moment I could look at as an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Now, that is a cliche. We hear that a lot, but that's really the truth, right? And so people aren't going to know or care about what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. People aren't going to care about what you know until they know that you care.
It's good.
And that's really the mission field for all of us, is to go into our workplace each day, caring about the people we interact with, just like Jesus, right? And I know that's hard because we work with a lot of people who we feel like we shouldn't care about. Some tough bosses. I had some tough bosses at ESPN. It's funny, I'll tell you a quick story. In 2015, I was going through a real rough stretch at ESPN with a couple of people who were above me. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, Carol, who was a former colleague of mine as a talent producer and now working in a different department. And I was kind of explaining to her, she's a Christian, and I was explaining to her how I'm really struggling right now with my current work situation. And she just said, well, I know you're struggling with this person specifically. Have you prayed for them? And I laughed at her on the phone. I said, no, of course I didn't pray for them. What do you mean? She's like, and I knew what she meant. I was just letting the flesh get the best of me, I guess. But I said, listen, I'm not going to pray for this guy that's making my life a living hell every single day. And she said, no, absolutely. You need to pray for him. You're called to do that. And I thought, wow, just another little nugget, another little example of how we're supposed to carry ourselves at work. Now, that doesn't mean we agree with everyone. It doesn't mean you're not going to have bickering and quarrels and things like that. But every single day is an opportunity to go in and be the hands and feet of Jesus, to love people radically, right? That's what Jesus did, to talk to people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have somebody talk to them, to buy somebody lunch or to sit down with them, to go a little bit beneath the surface, during lunchtime and ask them how they're doing. Steve, I once had a boss who in a few years as my boss never once asked me how I was doing or how my wife and my child were doing. All they asked me about was, did the work get done? What's on the docket today? And I remember that thinking, I don't ever want to be a person in charge like that.
Yeah.
Who simply talks to people about work. Like, I want to care about the person. And again, I failed obviously at that as well, like everybody has. But that's where you can make that real big influence on people and show them the love of Christ, is right there in the workplace.
So
and
good.
Again, it's business. So
Yep.
you still got to conduct your business, be great at what you do. That's what we're called to do. But looking at people, not as just employees, man, there's something that'll change there, I believe, in you when you go into that workplace every single day.
Well, Jason, I love you're truly genuine. You are one of the most authentic people, and you live what you preach in the sense of seeing people first. And
Yeah.
I know that's obviously been a journey for you, but I've experienced that. I absolutely love it. I want to come back to this conversation about forgiveness and praying for people who have wronged you in a moment, but I just have to do a quick speed round. Okay, just a quick speed round, just to reset the room. I see a picture of Dabo Sweeney up there.
Yes.
Okay, who in your mind, top 2 favorite coaches over the last 21 years that you just go, these were men of character, integrity, I just loved.
We've kind of talked about them both.
Yeah.
Coach Dungey for sure was one of those guys where I watched from afar. And, I was so excited for him when he won the Super Bowl, and then watching him, give glory to God on the biggest stage was amazing. Reading his books and then spending time with him on multiple occasions now. He's the real deal.
Yep.
I've only met Dabo briefly, and Dabo is on the cover of our Sports Spectrum magazine. That's what that is, our fall issue. But Dabo, from afar and from everybody I know who's talked to him, he's the real deal as well.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you a quick story. A guy who recently just passed, Coach Bobby Bowden, who came to ESPN, I think it was in August of 2013 or 14. I think it was 2013. But he came to ESPN that day. He was promoting his book. He was probably in his early 80s, I think, but he was still going. His mind was as sharp as a tack. I mean, he was doing his thing and had just written a book. And we were having this little ESPN fellowship group where about 7 or 8 of us got together just to talk and pray and just hear about life, maybe do a little bit of a Bible study. And Coach Bowden comes to ESPN, and Jessica, the same person who was with Tony Dungy, who got in my face, was with Coach Bowden that day, had heard that we had this fellowship group and brought Coach Bowden to it. And he sat and talked with us for 20 minutes about Jesus. And I'm thinking, my gosh, this is amazing. Look at what I get to do this day. But to know that, and I've heard this now since he's passed from people who I've talked to who played for him and coached with him, his one single desire was to make sure people were going to heaven with him.
Yeah.
So he talked about Jesus everywhere he went. And that day at ESPN, even in that little fellowship group, he talked to us about Jesus. And I thought, man, that's how I want to live my life. Like, I want my legacy, my why, to be an ambassador for Christ everywhere I go. And Bobby Bowden came to ESPN that day, and I saw that on display. So how could I forget Coach Bowden, right? One of the legends.
So good. Yeah. He has one clip that I listened to once where he's talking about generational sin and broken legacies. And it did something in me that changed the way that I saw being a father and what I wanted to do. I mean, it's just amazing. Okay, your first book is how I actually got connected to you.
That's right.
I remember someone passed it on to me because I had, until my dad came to faith, had a real interesting relationship with my father and had to learn what forgiveness was all about, had to learn. And I get a hold of this book, and I just remember just inhaling it. I was like, we are in many ways the same person, had some similar experiences. Can you talk a little bit about what forgiveness means to you based on this book, Live to Forgive?
Wow. Forgiveness means everything to me now. I think it did then too, but even after becoming a Christian, that 10-year span of being a follower of Christ at ESPN, well, there was a 10-year, 12-year span of being a follower of Christ and still working through my own forgiveness. And the book is about me forgiving my alcoholic father. And I had to work through forgiveness for a long time. I think I grasped and understood forgiveness for myself and God, right? Like, God, I need you. I come to you. I repent. I ask for forgiveness. Come into my life. I think I understood God's forgiveness towards me. But if you read scripture and you read it pretty clear on forgiveness, it's a non-negotiable for us with other people. And yet we're human, and yet we sin, and yet we struggle. And I had a lot of bitterness and anger towards my dad for so many years, even after becoming a Christian. But once I got it, right? Once I started to understand truly what forgiveness was, seeing others as God sees us, broken, in need, just, desperate, right? For approval and for just affirming, getting that affirmation from God and from our Father, right? Once I grasped what Jesus had done for us and then turning that around and exuding that to others, I understood that that's the big game changer for all of us.
Yeah.
Because when we're stuck in bondage, I really believe that's what happens when we don't forgive. We get stuck in bondage. We have this bitterness. It's not about the other person. We think it is. I'm going to hold that other person hostage for what they did to me. They're going to pay for what they did to me. But what really happens, Stephen, you know this, we've talked about this. We're the ones that get stuck. We're the ones that are actually trapped. We're the ones that have the chains around us. And I think it's Lewis Smedes said that to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner is me. Or is you. And when I hear about that quote, and I try to quote it as often as I can, it's the great reminder that we, and I'm talking to leaders here, right? We as leaders, if we don't learn to forgive well, we're the ones that are going to be enslaved in this bitterness. It's not going to do us well at all, personally, professionally, maybe even going home to our families, until we learn to forgive others well. And the way to do that is to look at the cross and look at Jesus and how he forgave us. But it's true freedom, Steve. When we forgive others, man, there is a freedom that takes place, and it allows us to truly walk in the calling that I believe God has placed on all of us. Now, here's the caveat, though. Two things. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation.
That's right.
Sometimes you've been hurt, too severely to become best buds with that person again. The other thing is that forgiveness does not always mean forgetfulness, which we hear a lot. Oh, forgive and forget. No, I wrote a whole book on my life and all of the pain that I had suffered from my dad. So I didn't forget. But forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about healing and moving on with our lives in the calling that God has placed on us. And that's where we have to kind of try to live, that live to forgive mentality. It really is about that every single day. And another thing too, Steve, it's a process. Remember that. That's the one thing I'll say that we'll close here on forgiveness is it's a process. It's not instantaneous. It's a daily dying to ourselves. It's a daily dying to ourselves to God. And it's a daily dying to ourselves with others in our lives, because we, like I said, we don't forget. So we have to remember each day, I forgive, or I'm asking you for forgiveness, and help me to forgive others. It's really part of the Lord's Prayer, right? Where he says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That's a daily prayer. Jesus saying, pray like this every single day. And so forgiveness is a big part of that.
So good. And I love how these two messages go together, because the uniform of leadership, we put this on every day when we step into whatever environment that God has entrusted. And we can be the kind of people who choose to bloom where we're planted, or be bitter where we're planted, or be looking to the next assignment and not being present to where we've been planted. But I love the fact that you've offered up just a few incredible nuggets of truth. And friends, I'm telling you, in the book, The Uniform of Leadership, in the book, Live to Forgive, there's even many, many more. But just this, I am third mentality, Christ first, others second, Philippians 2, value others above yourselves, do as Christ did, and then yourself. And then what's amazing about this is when you actually deal with people, you're going to get burned. And how do we actually embody what the cross and why Christ came, which was to showcase forgiveness? And if we are living for Christ and we're actually around difficult people, we're going to get to live to forgive others, and we're going to understand more about why we need forgiveness. We didn't get to this, but I do want to point people to what you're doing now, because I think your podcast, it's one of my favorites. I feel like you're every week, multiple times a week, introducing me to amazing Christ followers in the kingdom, in the sports world. Talk about what you're doing now post ESPN.
Yeah, so that was not an easy decision, and we can have that conversation another time on leaving ESPN. But I have the privilege and the honor to help lead our media team at Sports Spectrum. Sports Spectrum has been in ministry for 36 years. I started out as a magazine. We still have the magazine. That's the cover right behind me with Dabo Sweeney for our fall issue. But we also have a media that's growing, a media platform that's growing. And one of the first tasks I had was to start a podcast, the Sports Spectrum podcast, which is, you've been on now a couple times, Steve, and it's an opportunity for me to interview athletes, coaches, and other people on the intersection of sports and faith. There are a lot of people who love Jesus and love sports. There's a ton of athletes and coaches who are trying to do it the right way and live for God. And we just want to highlight them. And not only that, we want to bring Jesus back into the conversation. A lot of people are trying to take him out. And our goal is to bring him back into the sports conversation through our podcast network, and through the magazine and our stories and articles that we write on our website, sportspectrum.com. So I'm honored, really, to be able to help lead this team and to help grow this platform that I believe has a place, right? I mean, especially in the church, where we complain a lot that the athletes aren't representing, what we believe, or not representing themselves well, or doing things that you don't agree with. Well, if you get a chance to listen to Sports Spectrum, you'll hear about a lot of these athletes who are trying to do it the right way and trying to lead with Christ out in front. And that's what we get to do. And I'm honored, man. I am.
That's awesome. Okay, 3 last quick questions.
Okay.
Where can people find you on social media? Because you're a great follow.
Yeah, Twitter and Instagram are the 2 best places. Just my name, Jason Ramano. I'm particularly fond of Instagram right now. I really love the platform. And I'd love to connect with anybody who's on there.
Awesome. 2, everyone who's watching this is going, what is this hat that you are wearing? Where do I find it? It's got to be something with sports. What is this? What's this team?
All right. So I live in Bristol, Connecticut. I still live where ESPN is. And about 20 minutes away is a minor league baseball team called the Hartford Yard Goats. The Hartford Yard Goats. By the way, Hartford in Connecticut, not known about its yard goats, or not known for its yard goats. But we have a minor league baseball team. It's actually a AA affiliate for the Colorado Rockies. It's here in Hartford, and they have the best minor league ballpark in America, as voted in 2019, Dunkin' Donuts Park. And that's what this hat is. This is the Hartford Yard Goats hat that I'm representing the home team, the local team today.
That's fantastic. And then lastly, give us your prediction for the Arizona Cardinals. How well do we do this year?
I think better than a lot of people maybe nationally think. I remember talking to Colt McCoy a couple months ago on our podcast, and he's now the backup for Arizona behind Kyler Murray. And he was so excited about the talent on that team and the potential for this team, and some of the veterans that they brought in, obviously JJ Watt, and some of the great players that they have, the younger team. This is a nice mesh. The problem is they're in a really tough division, like every year in the West, but I think they could do pretty well. It's weird. We have 17 games this year, Steve. Yeah. So I almost wanted to say 9-7, 10-6, but that's not what it is anymore. Right. So maybe 10 wins. And if they can get 10 wins, I think they get in the playoffs, and they could make a run. I think they're a dangerous team. Kyler Murray has to take that next step, though. He has to take the leap. He's got a lot of talent, but there's a difference between being really talented and taking a leap to that next echelon of quarterback. If he can do that, I mean, as the quarterback goes, so goes the team usually. And I think they have a really good shot at improving on what they were building last year.
Well, you just won this entire room. They love you because of what you just said.
Did you really think I was going to tell you and the Arizona fans that are watching that they were not going to make the playoffs? I mean, I know how to play, Steve. I know how to play the game. So let's go here.
Let's go. Well, hey, thank you so much, man, for joining us. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and your example. Much love, my friend.
Thanks to you, buddy. Love you too. And thanks to everyone. This was a great opportunity.